Hello and welcome to another edition of Dixon Cox. We are back after my absence, entirely my fault. I've had an inner ear problem, which you don't need to know all about, but it gives you vertigo, and it means I couldn't even read my phone without feeling sick. I couldn't sleep. It's been an extraordinary ordeal, but I won't bore the listeners and viewers with it. But I only mention it to say that is where I've been, but I am back. Guess who's back? It's not Nigel Farage, it's me. And of course, it's Mr. Paul Cox, the star of GB News and many other things. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Nick. It's good to have you back on screen. Worrying times back there. Worrying times.
Yeah, it's a funny phrase, back on screen. But I am back on screen. And we're back together because we really don't get put together. If you're a fan of GB News Headliners, which is a show we both appear on, but we don't appear on it simultaneously because that's sort of banned. That's banned by the arcane and obscure booking processes. So you never see me and Paul together. That would just be too good, I believe, is the theory. So
Too based, I think, is probably the concern.
two based with a two as well, the numeral two,
Yeah.
and then based like a 90s band, like one of those 90s. Who are those 90s? Like Salt and Pepper was one with an wasn't
Too
it?
unlimited.
Yeah, yeah. It's like some sort of
No,
90s band.
famously, no limits / no lyrics. But
Yeah.
it was number one, and we're not the political commentariat version of Too Unlimited. By the way, we're much more sophisticated than that. I don't know where we're at, but we're above that. We're somewhere between there and I don't know. Enya.
Shakademus and Pliers.
Yeah, Shakademus and Pliers. What a band!
Watch the rider. We are the thinking man. That's probably not allowed to say that anymore, are you? I can do the whole. I'm not going to do it, but I can, if called upon, do the whole rap if that's what you call it. From She Don't Let Nobody. She don't let nobody. Right. He's doing that. Then they come. Watch the rider, and then he comes in and does the whole. No guy out to broken beat to one night stand. Pick up all that stuff. I'm not going to do that.
Big up.
Because that's too David Brent. I'm not going to do it, but if I did, I can do the whole thing.
I mean, I feel like you have done enough.
Yeah, I've done enough to show that I could. If I wanted, no, but you're probably allowed to do that, aren't you? It's in the song.
Oh, look. This is. I was going to say this is our podcast. I might be getting ahead of myself, Nick. It's Dixon Cox for a reason. Dix at the front, Cox at the back. But it's.
I still find that funny. That's the level of my humour.
That's
like a sign. You're entering a club. You're entering Paul's club. Dix at the front, Cox at the back. You know the rules. You know the rules, John. You do this every week. Yeah, but they're the same thing. They both mean penis. I've told you.
It's where you put them, though, John. You know that, mate. Come on.
You know the difference, John. All right, it's where you put it that's the issue.
Yeah, basically, we can do what we like, Nick. That's the point. There's no Ofcom.
Yes. There's no off-communists to regulators. As Dan Wood would say, we love Dan, but the off-communists, I'm totally free from the off-communists. So, yeah, I mean, and by the way, people hate this section. I mean, imagine how much the haters of the banter are going to hate me talking about Shakademus and Pliers at the top.
Just maybe there should be a trigger warning, a banter trigger warning. Please be aware, the next 5 minutes may contain banter. You may be amused. Other people watching may be amused. This might upset you.
And just one quick comment. I found a comment. I can't find it now because it was a while ago back before I was ill. I thought I'll talk about that, and then we didn't because we didn't do one. But it was someone complaining. They were like, it starts, I don't like the start. The middle's good, but then it's paywalled at the end or something like that. They were like annoyed about the whole, they were like annoyed. They wanted it to be like just exactly how they wanted. And I was like, the ingratitude of like, it's like a free podcast. It's like, this free thing is not perfect. It's basically, the comment was basically like, you've walked into a shop, there's some free cakes, like free cookies, let's say. We walked into a bakery, and there's these free cookies on the counter. And what the guy was basically saying was, I don't like all of these free cookies. I like some of them, and I'm not going to buy anything, by the way, because the other thing he said, I don't like the start, the middle's okay, and no, I'm not going to pay for it. And it's like, no one's asking you to, mate. So it was exactly like he'd walked into a bakery, said, I like these free cookies, these ones are shit, and I'm not giving you any money, then walked out. I was like, all very unnecessary. This is just a free offering. You can have it or not, and that's the end of, that's all.
I don't believe this person's watching either. I don't. I don't
Really?
believe this person's watching. If you're watching and you're in the comments, tell me, repeat in the comments that Paul said hairy ball sack at one point, which I've just done, and just which,
Just a
by the
test.
way, it's dicks at the front, cocks at the back, but as we all know, in the middle in the lower section is hairy ball sack. Say Paul said that, and
Right.
then I might believe that you've watched beyond the very beginning. Also, this is not scripted. This absolute genius level bants is not. We didn't even talk about it before this. It's very serious about what are we going to cover. There's so many stories.
Yes.
Don't say ball sack, Paul. Remember
Right.
all
No,
that
none of
sort
that
of
came
stuff.
up. I didn't say I'll mention Shakademus and Pliers, then start doing the rap, then pull out of it. None of that was said.
Never,
Okay. This is just
never.
how annoying we actually are, is what you'll say. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to the stories. I've been away. We're back. I think people can just skip and then there's those annoying comments that tell people where to start the actual podcast. 12:02 actually starts.
We should never actually start.
But here's one last thing I'm going to say. That annoying comment from the guy where he wanted the exact product that he wanted, even though it's free, and he's like, it has to be like this, then this. I was annoyed at that guy, and then I realized, is that not like my life? I realized Paul, was the same because God has made me, and I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask for any of this world, sky and trees. So what I've basically done is, because I'm such a miserable bastard, I've basically gone, oh, no, not sure about this aspect of life. So God gives us life, right? So just gives us it: trees, sky, penguins, and such. Duckbill platypus. That was an interesting
the
one.
three, the three
Yeah,
big
yeah,
things.
yeah. He gives us, elephants. He gives us all that, Paul. Man United or your preferred team, Portsmouth or something. He gives us all this stuff, and then I'm just there going, oh, but I don't like it. And so actually, I'm the same as that guy. So I brought it back to myself and realized I'm that annoying commenter on YouTube, the YouTube of life, Paul, going, oh, I like this. I like the fun parts when I'm talking about Shakademus and Pliers with Paul, but I don't like the endless suffering. But but it's not up to me. It's just that's how it's set up. So,
It's
you know,
it's so true. But by the way, the reason that we're frustrated by these people is they represent something to us that we hate about ourselves, Nick. We all know this. I mean, not all commenters, by the way. Some commenters are mentally ill, and
they represent the mentally ill part of ourselves that we don't like.
yeah, maybe so. But some commenters say things. I mean, all that sort of stuff is always amusing. Always amusing. If you think it's upsetting us, it's not upsetting us.
But it is
Um,
upsetting me, but not Paul.
yeah,
Uh,
maybe. We're not going to say what upsets us because we'll just get a shit ton of that. That's how that
yes,
works.
that's true, and everything upsets me. So, okay, well, good. Well, that's the banter dispensed with, and maybe we can move on because we've got some big stories this week, and I've been a little bit out of it. So if I'm not across every detail, don't shout at me because I've been very out of things. But we are going to cover the Keir Starmer voice coach, one of the most successful voice coaches no, known to the planet. He clearly nailed it. I've had a voice. Can't you tell? I've had extensive voice coaching, and then we're going to do
Sausages.
the Islamophobia Council, run by Angela Rayner or compiled by her.
Oh, me.
Islamophobia, Paul. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to maybe talk about reform going ahead in the polls, which might be related in some way to those other two stories. One could argue. Then this might be in the paywall section, but we'll probably do Trump's executive order. He's done an executive order. Well, he's done a lot of executive orders, and they're all quite interesting. But Trump orders all federal employees to remove pronouns from their emails might be the one we start with. Maybe we'll do Ed Davey watch. And then back by popular demand, we'll do a little bit of peak woke for the fans of my old podcast, The Weekly Skeptic. People loved a bit of peak woke, so we're bringing that back just for the fans. So it's a packed agenda, Paul. So let's crack on now with the organized, serious part of the show, which is, well, we're going to start with this voice coach story. Now, anyone who's not in England or Britain will be going, "What now? What nonsense now is ruining your country?" Well, this is what's happening, and this is from the Independent, just to prove it's not all a right wing story.
Yeah.
Starmer voice coach travel between lockdown tiers as COVID rule breach row grows. So this is Leonie Mellinger, and she went to Starmer's office or Labour's London office on Christmas Eve 2020 before travelling to Brighton when the capital was under Tier 4 regulations and Brighton was in Tier 3. I'd forgotten we had tiers. I've blocked out much of that period. I was on the Xanax the whole time. I wasn't, but I wish I was. And I remember lockdown and hating it, and I always had to talk about how awful lockdown was. And obviously, didn't have the dodgy, whatever we're allowed to call it now on YouTube these days, the little thing in your arm. Chose not to have that. But I'd forgotten really about the tiers, and they were just these absolute nonsense tiers that no one could possibly understand or follow. And that apparently includes Starmer's alleged voice coach. She's an actress or actor, whatever you're meant to say now, who is an actress and communication skills coach. And one of my favorite parts was that she it said that she moved between tiers like she's the kind of tier lord. I don't know. I'm trying to find my favorite bit. Like a sort of a Doctor Who, but of the tiers. She's like a tier whisperer. She travelled between tiers because obviously Brighton was in one tier and London was in another. So she's the kind of she defies all tiers. And the reason it was found out was a completely absurd reason to do with the narcissism of the modern era, Paul. Miss Mellinger took a selfie. So, Tier 4 rules at the time stated residents in Tier 1 to 3 should not enter Tier 4 areas. Miss Manager took us, I mean, this wasn't complicated, was it? Miss Manager took a selfie at Labour HQ on Christmas Eve. The same afternoon, Sir Keir delivered an 11-minute address on Brexit. At 6 p.m. the same day, she shared a photograph on Instagram and X, formerly Twitter, captioned Christmas Eve and going home, according to the Telegraph. So, what has undone her is her own extraordinarily banal, narcissistic pointless photos. And I'm sure we've all done them. But going home, it's like, we didn't need to know that. Christmas Eve. We didn't need to know that. We know it's Christmas Eve. And like, what value did these add? All they did was potentially take down. To be honest, those banal, boring, stupid photos may be amazing if they end up taking down Keir Starmer. And this story is stupid enough to do that. It's
Yeah.
just whether our media will give him the Boris Partygate treatment or not, and I suspect they won't for now. But what do you think, Paul?
Oh man. Well, the first things first is, at that point, these Christmas 2020 was the Christmas that never was, wasn't it? People weren't allowed to visit their families. You couldn't go to
So it
funerals.
wasn't all
You
bad.
couldn't visit. You couldn't exactly. I mean,
You
I'm
had
just
a
listing the
legitimate,
things.
airtight excuse for the first time ever. Sorry, can't visit. I'd love
I
to.
didn't go anywhere at Christmas 2020. It was bliss. I mean, I know I've got friends that are still upset about Christmas 2020. They value their time with their family.
It
A
was
feeling
bleak.
that many of us don't understand. But I guess I'm slightly sorry for them. But this whole
Yeah, I want to
exercise,
not see my family. Sorry to interrupt, but I want to not see my family on my own terms, not the government's. Do you know what I mean?
well, and exactly the point, isn't it? And having to revisit this is, oh man, it just brings back all those memories and feelings associated to that time where it all started to become a little too Orwellian, very prescribed. Kids weren't being educated anymore; they were being isolated from their friends, and they were the first generation uh, since Adam and Eve that had not been able to live their lives in the same way. It wasn't even that way during World War Two or World War One or any of the other wars previously that you wish to name. But children essentially had things to do, didn't they? They were up chimneys or they were preparing bombs to kill Germans, whatever they might be doing. At least they could go and do it. They couldn't do it during 2020, and adults couldn't do the same. And of course, most people resented it, rightly so, because freedom is hard earned, and we were under this kind of very extreme draconian laws that were all made just at the swipe of a pen to try and prevent us from dying or killing other people based on some rather dubious evidence. And as it turns out, entirely dubious evidence. And we would have all been much better off just carrying on with our lives. So it was a reminder of all those things and then these ridiculous tears. And we've talked about where I lived previously in Waterlooville. Well, the mad thing about Waterlooville at that time is it's under the jurisdiction of two county councils. One is Havant and one is North East Hampshire, and they both had different rules. So you could just go one street on, and you wouldn't be able to do something that you could do in the previous street and vice versa. Of course, there was no difference in terms of the way the virus would travel across those streets, but it did mean some people had Christmases with their family and some people didn't, and they were literally meters apart. And of course, many people, law-abiding citizens, followed those rules. And the one person that always wanted us to follow the rules was Keir Starmer. Not only did he was obviously it let's be honest, he had a copy of that by his bed ready for a quick rules masturbation session. He absolutely loved this stuff. And he wanted us to lock down longer and harder in the most pornographic way you can imagine. This is really what Keir Starmer wanted. So to discover that during that period, Keir Starmer himself was flaunting the rules, potentially flaunting the rules, to have a voice coach visit him is quite shocking. It's not shocking now, is it? That's the thing. I just said it's
And
quite shocking. It's not shocking. Of course he was lying. The reason it's not shocking any longer is we've had Keir Starmer as Prime Minister for 7 or 8 months. We know he lies about everything. He doesn't know how he does because he doesn't know what he believes in. He doesn't know what the truth is either. So this is just one other thing that's come out of the woodwork that's gonna kill him off. I think, Nick.
I've just thought, do we? He's called two-tier Keir famously. Is he now four-tier Keir? I mean, isn't
He
it
is
isn't it
40
ironic that the
Keir.
tiers are going to take down? Has anyone said this? Am I the first to invent this? I
No,
mean,
well, no. Now you say it, I vaguely remember Patrick Christie saying it at some point. Maybe I read
oh,
it. Maybe I
Christie's there
saw it.
first as
I mean,
always.
yeah, good old Christie's. Um,
Yeah, so now he's
how
four-tier Keir.
seriously do we
Got,
see? This is the conundrum in my head is: do I care? I don't actually care about it in the sense that I don't care that that's what he did. People move between tiers. People had jobs to do. But the reason we should care is this was the man who wholeheartedly believed we weren't going far enough. When everybody was locked down and being told what they can do every minute of every day, there was only 1 hour, by the way, at this point. You're allowed to go and walk 1 hour. It's like the
absolutely.
Shawshank Redemption. We only allowed out for 1 hour, and Keir was saying that wasn't enough. And that
It's
man
disgusting.
was allowing someone to come all the way up from Brighton on the train and teach him how to speak, which of
Yeah,
course is not a key worker, not in any way, shape, or form. Key worker status for those working in local and national government at the time only included those, and by the way, I'm reading from the article, this isn't my words, those administrative occupations essential to effective delivery of COVID-19 response. It wasn't that. And essential public services. It wasn't that either. And that was according to the government's own guidance. So it was none of those things. And there is it's historic. There's evidence to suggest that they held some of their meetings previously over Zoom, which everybody did at that time. So they could have done that. He got the poor woman to come all the way from Brighton up to Labour HQ to teach him something he was incapable of learning, and that was to speak
It-
coherently.
well, some
So
would argue that is a key worker. Some would say Starmer is so bad at speaking that makes it key worker status. You know what I mean? He was like, we, we must get, we must let all criminals off the hook. She's like, no, 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 that's not going to work here. You've got to, and she's like playing him like famous speeches from King Lear and stuff. And some people have said, what did he sound like before? I think that's a very legitimate question. If that's what came out
yeah,
after, the worst speaker of all time, what went in before? And do you believe, Paul? I mean, we don't get any defamation here, but some are saying if you're coming at Christmas Eve, you're probably not a voice coach. You're already a friend to Starmer and his alleged wife. You're probably not just doing voice coaching. But I think Starmer is boring enough to be doing voice coaching on Christmas Eve and going. I know it's Christmas Eve, but it's a very important time. I've had this Halifax thing. Was it Halifax? He was in. He lost that by-election or something. He's like, was it Hartlepool? Anyway,
Hartlepool.
whatever. I've got a problem with Hartlepool. I know it's Christmas Eve. Right? My family's a sham anyway, essentially. So if we could just do some voice coaching on Christmas Eve, I know you'll have to travel between tiers, but I'm not going to follow those rules because I'm better, because I'm the elite. Though later I am going to attack Boris Johnson extensively about some cake. That's why he's got to go. As you say, the rules, the Partygate was nonsense. The rules were nonsense. The whole problem was lockdown. But once we have these rules, once we're playing this game, if you're going to attack Boris, not that we love Boris, he's responsible for the Boris wave, he's an absolute disaster, another criminal of history. But if you're going to attack, but not literal criminal, don't sue me. But if you're going to attack Boris over Partygate for ages, and he ends up taking him down, then this has to take Starmer down. But this won't take Starmer down, probably because the media are on his side for now. But the second they're not, they've got so much stuff to take Starmer down. They've got an endless list of scandals with
Yeah.
Starmer if they want.
I
Allegedly
I,
satirical
I
content.
agree with you, allegedly, absolutely. I agree with you that the media is still on Starmer's side. That's because he's 8 months in, and you know they're trying to give him a fair crack of the whip. But every day, it's just endless deceit and incompetence. It's unreal. But I'm starting to get the sense, without any evidence at all, that these are stories that are now emanating from within the Labour Party. It You would need to be associated relatively closely to the Labour Party to understand what was going on at this point. I mean, let's not forget she was his voice coach.
Well, we
What
should have
bloody
said,
hell?
isn't this coming from the book Get In? It's
Yeah,
all
this is
coming from this
it,
book. This
it
book's coming
is.
out, and one of the things the
But
book alleges is that Morgan McSweeney, the aide to Starmer, said that Starmer was more like an HR manager than a leader, which is just so incredibly plausible because that's exactly what he's like. And the another allegation was that Angela Rayner said that who's running Labour because it wasn't Starmer. This was in 2021. So it's all in this book called Get In.
yeah, so by the way, for those who don't know what HR stands for, it stands for Human Remains, which are all currently locked in a closet, waiting to tumble out. Uh, a closet owned by Keir Starmer, of course. And
Are
he
you saying
had
he's an
this.
actual serial killer, Paul? Because I don't want to make that claim on my podcast because I'm responsible for that as the publisher.
Again, this is another metaphor.
Right.
Skeletons in the cupboard,
I got it. I got it.
meaning secrets, and these things are all going to come out, tumbling out at some point. Nick, she was his voice coach right back in 2017. This is 2020 at this point, so 3 years involved, and for another 2 years after that, he had 5 years of this voice coach. And this was when, and I forgot he had this role, shadow Brexit secretary for the Labour Party in 2017. Remember that role? I mean, it's no wonder Brexit. We were discussing this before we came on air. People voted for Brexit in June of 2016, and we've only just recently celebrated 5 year anniversary or remembered it. I don't know if there were actually any celebrations. Most people think, whether you voted for it or not, that it's never been delivered in any way. So this is something that's gone on a long time. That he wouldn't have needed to. He. The idea was that he delivered an 11-minute speech as kind of rebuttal to something that Boris Johnson was saying with regards to Brexit. He didn't need coaching at this point in time to come up with this. He could have done all that. He could have done it via email because they could have just sent the speech and said, "Oh, change this word to that," etc. etc. All very easy, rudimental stuff. Or
What's wrong
over
with
telephone, of
Zoom? Why
course.
couldn't he coach
Over
it? He could
Zoom.
have coached him over Zoom.
I'm just basically listing the endless options that were available to avoid this poor woman having to travel from Brighton to London to Labour HQ. So you have to wonder why he was so keen to have her there, because she wasn't really a key worker, and they'd already been working together 3 years at that point. So he would have had all the techniques that she'd been teaching him at his disposal. So why bring her up? Why have her there? Why have her there for so long, Nick? Why?
Mm. Well, I've got some ideas, but I don't think any of them will. I think they'll all get me put in jail in Starmer's Britain. So I can't.
Yeah, almost certainly. So we have a situation now where there are many of us that are wanting to see the back of Keir Starmer because he represents something I think, quite frankly, relatively dangerous, politically dangerous to the UK. He's entirely like none of his manifesto promises have come to fruition at all. He appears to have lied about everything he promised during the campaign, and now they're just doing anything. Like it's schizophrenic. I said this in a tweet the other week. The Labour cabinet and their output is schizophrenic. You have got them all, and I know this is not entirely unusual, but it's quite unusual in the first 7 or 8 months. Every single one of them working against each other. And of course, what you end up having is the Chancellor is kind of against most people because everything needs money. But the Chancellor herself, Rachel Reeves, of course, goes by other names. But Rachel Reeves, for the purpose of this discussion, she she's someone who's very much come is discredited as well. Her CV itself looks like it was slightly fabricated. You know, we've we've
I deny
we've
that
all perhaps
just
lied.
because as the publisher, I completely deny that. I think Rachel from accounts is one of the smartest chancellors and most qualified we've ever had.
So we brilliant, well done, Nick. So we got Rachel Reeves who has possibly stretched the truth somewhat on her CV, which I know is something that some people consider a criminal offence because she's in office. We've got Keir Starmer, who is constantly lying about everything, but in the background delivering his devilishly Machiavellian um, mandate that he's promised himself and those that sit in this kind of neo communist part of the Labour Party that pretends not to be on the left, but is actually so far to the left that they're introducing policies like the Islamophobia Council, which we'll come to later on, I'm sure. But and then all sorts of other people. Ed Miliband is a net zero zealot. Net zero will cripple the country if it was to be followed to the letter of the propaganda. So all of these people are utter wrong'uns who have no meaningful place in British politics at this moment when British politics is going through an existential crisis. Because around us, what we're seeing is Europe falling apart. It is. No two ways about it. Europe's on its knees. You've got the rise of Trump too. And what we're seeing there is all the people that are either openly or secretly looking to the West and looking to America and thinking, my goodness, why can't we have a leader like that? Irrespective of whether they agree with some of the things they're saying. Trump's saying. He is delivering. So he said, I'm going to do A, B, and C. And then next week he did A, B, and C. And he just did it. Oh, but what about? No, what about? He just did it. And we're not seeing any politics of any kind here.
Well,
Any politics of any kind like that here. And you know, this is creating an existential crisis for us. Keir Starmer is not long for the job, but it's just a matter of time when they go. Strategically, it has to be right for the Labour Party. But we are stuck. The worst thing about this is we're stuck because this Labour Party is going to be in power till 2029, at which point Trump too is pretty much done and dusted. So he's not going to have any direct impact on us. But one thing he will do is have an indirect impact. If he continues in the same vein that he is now, then what we're going to see is the uprising of populist politics aligned to Trump, and of course, we're starting to see that. Something else we're going to talk about. We're going to start to see that in the polls.
yes,
And go on,
we
Nick. Sorry.
will be kind of like the digital delay of the United States. If you that's the guitar term. The Edge was very fond of digital delay in U2 because Trump will happen, then he'll go. But the echo basically will be just after when we get reform in 2029, but America will have just had it. So it's going to be we're just a bit behind, and one hopes with when reform gets in that they can start to do Trump-esque things. But let's see. But as you say, but for now we're wallowing, we're behind, and we're in this really behind all of Europe as well in this leftist hellscape. And the other example, which we'll now come to, is this bizarre council set up by Angela Rayner, of all people. So the Telegraph has Angela Rayner to set rules on Islam and free speech. Ex-Tory Dominic Grieve tipped to head up the advisory council, but critics warn blasphemy law could be created. So this is really where we are. We have the grooming gangs scandal. And instead of getting a national inquiry into that, we get an Islamophobia council to impose de facto blasphemy laws. And I've said on Twitter, it tells you everything you need to know about this government and this country. We're very much in the phase of containing the outrage rather than doing anything about the problem. And you couldn't get a more perfect example, really. It's like, will you have a national inquiry into this horrific scandal that's an atrocity on a historic scale? It's one of the worst atrocities seen in Europe or anywhere in the world ever. Is the grooming gangs? It's beyond all belief. Rape and torture of girls for thousands of them for years and years and years and ongoing. And it's like, no, I'll tell you what we'll have instead. We'll have a little council stopping you talking about it. How about that? That's my best offer, and that's what they're doing. And to make it even more absurd, they've let Angela Rayner be in charge of it because she's got to do something. He's got to find little jobs for her to do, and so she doesn't keep calling him an abstract failure when she means abject, because we've given it to the person who doesn't know words. Um, we've given it to someone who can't understand words to define the meaning of an incredibly important word, a made-up word that Christopher Hitchens warned us all about before his unfortunate death. Christopher Hitchens, when he said, "And be careful, the word Islamophobia is already coming into effect. They're already using this. They're using it to shut down your free speech and to shut down legitimate criticisms." And that's what we have here. And one of the people on this council, among the 16 candidates, says the Telegraph, shortlisted for the council is Kari Asim, a Leeds imam who was dismissed as a government advisor by the Tories in 2022 after backing calls for a ban on the film The Lady of Heaven about the Prophet Muhammad's daughter. So there was these quite aggressive, let's say, protests about this film being shown. It was a big story at the time. That's one of the guys you want to put on this council. So, and Robert Jenrick, who keeps popping up, still very much obviously wants to be leader, in my opinion, says the government should drop its plans for such a deeply flawed definition of Islamophobia. Of course, we should tackle anti-Muslim hate wherever it occurs, but this definition is a Trojan horse for a blasphemy law protecting Islam. And of course it is. Now, I'm not someone who's going to go around burning Qurans, obviously, or drawing the Prophet Muhammad. I'm not going to, it's not in my personality to do that. There's no need to do that. However, that's very different from overusing this word Islamophobia, which shouldn't exist. It's not a thing. It's not a word. It's a made-up word for legitimate criticisms, and you certainly don't need a council to tell us what we can and can't do in this country. And if people, I mean, I've said it many times. You got to be obviously you want to be careful about how you say these things, but I've said it on the telly many times. You can't actually have free speech and these de facto blasphemy laws. You can't actually have one of them's got to win. So we don't. As long as we have a system where you can't draw certain people and so on, you can't have free speech as well. So you have to pick. And it looks as though, of course, this Labour government, to no one's surprise, is going to pick blasphemy laws. And we saw that man be arrested in Manchester the other day. So we already effectively have them. What do you think about this, Paul?
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? We can already identify the people that are committing the most obvious offences very, very quickly. And I slowly said that because I'm not convinced any of these things are offences, but I know they are offensive to certain people. There's a whole different ball game. But of course, this is what I like to call as neo-international socialism. It's the race to find the most victimised minority. And once you find the most victimised minority, you align yourself with them and groups of a similar nature, and you build up that community of victimised minorities, and you tell them that you support them. The irony, of course, is that these victimised minorities, so to speak, are huge groups of people. They might still be, to the strictest meaning of the term, a minority, but they are wholly powerful. And they really don't need the support that they've been given. But what we do know is that Labour are terrified. Labour specifically are terrified, particularly of the threat of from the Muslim community, because they've seen that, and this is what they see at the moment during the general election recently, that it was the independent Muslim vote that was a big challenge to some of their places, Jess Phillips and Wes Streeting, and I'm sure many others as well. These people don't really need protecting in any more, should I say, than anyone else needs protecting. The important thing to identify very quickly on is where our biggest terror threat comes from. By far and wide, it's the threat from Islamist terrorists. We've seen it play out, tragically seen it play out. I don't even need to remind you of where they were, how they were, who the victims were. We all know, and everybody watching and listening to this can quote 6 or 7 immediately in their mind as they're listening to this. Second to that, we're told is far right extremism. Well, what we have learned in recent times is that the bar to be considered far right extremism is a lot significantly lower than it is to be considered Islamist extremism. So Islamist extremism is still the very biggest, even though the bar is very high. So we find ourselves in this absolutely weird paradox where we are trying to protect the group that are most likely to harm us. And that's not to smear every, good Muslim across the UK. But I'm sorry, chaps, and they're mainly chaps because the women aren't allowed to speak. I'm sorry, chaps. What we've got, what you will have to start controlling your own, because this is the problem. Islamist terrorism threat is the problem. Now, to have a council set up to try and tackle people that are scared of that, because that's what a phobia is. Islamophobia is a fear of Islam. And when you see when you see people blowing themselves up at children's concerts, or stabbing young girls to death, at the rate of 126 times per child. Sorry, that's really upsetting to say. Of course, you're going to be scared of it. How could you not be scared of it? So, Islamophobia is coming from those problems. We would be much better setting up a council, and I'm sure that we have Prevent and we have MI6, MI5. All these things are working hard. Prevent arguably not, but MI5 and MI6, I won't have a bad word said against them. They're doing a lot of great work in the background. Okay, but we need to focus all our efforts on that, and that can focus on far right extremism as well if it's there. I'm not suggesting for a minute there isn't any there, but whatever a form of extremism is, we should be focusing on that. What we should not be doing is generating councils based on a political ideology which best suits the party that is funding and leading it. This whole thing is a crock, an absolute crock of shit designed to boost Labour's popularity. It doesn't prevent anybody from being harmed in any way, shape, or form, unless you consider taking offence a harm. And nobody should have the arrogance they think they can go through life thinking they could never be offended or hear something that they don't like. Okay, I'm a Christian, you're a Christian. Someone burns the Bible. We might think, why did they do that? But we certainly wouldn't think death to that person or even harm to that person. Not whatsoever. Now, I'm not so stupid that I don't understand the significance of the Quran to a Muslim, okay? I understand that's offensive. I understand that's beyond offense to them. But we are in the West. We are in Great Britain. We fought hard to make sure we didn't have blasphemy laws. So I'm ever so sorry you have chosen to exist here, and you're very welcome as long as you assimilate. And assimilate means you have to accept that we don't have blasphemy laws. And the Labour Party, it's disastrous that the Labour Party believe that they can turn back all those hard-fought rights and create essentially new blasphemy laws and create whole councils designed to watch people in the country and watch what they're saying. Nick, I mean, honestly, I don't know what to say about this. Anyone who thinks this is a good idea, Dominic Grieve, by the way, Dominic Grieve, I don't know if he is still, I don't know if he is ex, but Tory MP. Dominic Grieve's no more Tory than Jeremy Corbyn. There's no conservatism about Dominic Grieve. I mean, he wanted to overturn Brexit, for goodness sake. It doesn't matter whether you voted for or against Brexit. That was a sovereign vote, and you don't overturn it. You certainly don't overturn it if you're a conservative MP. Like I say, this is what I call international or neo-international socialism. It's the race to find the most victimised marginal group, and in doing so, you get them on board and you say, vote for us. And that's all it is. There's no other reason to do this.
Yes, he's technically been an independent Grieve since 2019, but yeah, he was never a real Tory. It seemed, or he might have been a real Tory in the sense that Tories are useless, but not a real conservative. Some would say, to be very, very reasonable and journalistic about this, that there's a slight difference with the Bible because the Quran is believed to be the direct word of God.
Yeah,
Therefore, it's
we
more
don't believe
offensive
that.
to Muslims burning it. I've heard that argument. You talk about blasphemy laws. I think what I would do is impose Christian blasphemy laws again, because you say we fought hard to get rid of them. I'm not sure that's worked out very well. I just think we have to be a Christian country because that's what we are, and Islam gets their big chunk of the world, and you go to Saudi Arabia, you don't expect everything to be Christian. Come to Britain, you can't expect everything to be Islamic. But I have a different view to. Sometimes some of our colleagues on GB News sort of like to goad Muslims and try and get me in an awful lot of trouble and say things I haven't said. But actually, I think you have to respect them and say that's a major world religion. It's just not our religion in this country. It's very simple. So, but our offer is so weak and so confused that we're saying, well, no, we don't believe in that, but we believe in question mark. That's the problem. What do we believe in? If it's a secular West, is it liberalism we believe in? Is it free speech? Well, we clearly don't have free speech. Is it post liberalism? Is it a progressive elite? What do we believe in? Really, the offer being posited is this progressive elite management of offense, this anarcho tyranny situation. That's really all we have. It's an incredibly poor offer. What we have is the increasingly frail and falling apart, collapsing management of the multicultural society that's a complete failure.
Yeah.
So we don't have anything robust against it. Someone might try and offer a kind of classical liberalism against it. There are people that try and do that, perhaps Andrew Doyle or someone, but that doesn't seem to be working. He might say it is going to work long term. I don't know. We're going up against people with a very, very clear idea of what they are and what they believe and what they want to happen, and we have no idea. And all our idea is to say, "Oh, stop criticizing those people." It's a real disaster.
They they celebrate in others that which they criticize us for. So everything you started saying about Christianity, blasphemy laws for Christianity, having Britain as a Christian country once again. Now, if you asked for that, you'd be considered further than far right by the types, Angela Rayner, etc., Keir Starmer, etc. However,
Whoops.
what they are celebrating is that exact sentiment from others, from their country, that they are freely able to bring here and be protected. So it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It's entirely disingenuous. And I used to be under the misnomer that these people had got to the position that they're in due to some form of intelligence in some way. Now, it might be an intelligence that I'm entirely unaware of, but the fact that they are unable to see this suggests to me that actually, on a number of occasions, they've proven themselves to be quite thick. It's not a term I say that lightly, actually, because it's. I don't think you should criticise people's intelligence or it, in politics, to criticize someone's intelligence immediately just suggests that you don't want to have the debate, you don't want to have the argument. But the more you look at this and how duplicitous and contradictory these things are, the more you realize that they cannot possibly understand what they're saying. They just cannot understand it because, like I just pointed out, if a Muslim chap of a fighting age, let's say, wants to leave his wife and daughter back in the war-torn country and head to the UK for new jeans on a rubber dinghy, he can do so. And when he gets here, it'd be celebrated by Labour, entirely celebrated for that. And he'll be celebrated in a way that suggests he doesn't have to change anything about what he's done or what he's doing or what he plans to do. However, if we want to take that homegrown culture and base it in Christianity, let's just say for the purposes of this discussion, and we want to perpetuate that across the UK, and it manifests itself in things like the Tommy Robinson March at the weekend, or voting or becoming a member of Reform, that is seen as bad. It's exactly the same sentiment, except it's at home. And there's nothing wrong with home, and there's nothing wrong with Great Britain. The things that are wrong with Great Britain is that we've removed all tolerance for British people and our values, and we've given all that tolerance to people that are alien to us, who don't want anything to do with us. They just want to come here and they want to enjoy the benefits of being here.
Well, as the account Ho Math said the other day, you don't actually need to tolerate things that are good. Um, well, a few comments on that, Paul. I mean, are they thick, or are they afraid, or are they calculating? Because as you also sort of alluded to as well, we've got all these councils where, all these areas, jurisdictions where, um, boroughs where people like Jess Phillips are threatened and only just win against these independents who are pro-Palestine. So they're worried about the Muslim vote, Labour. So we all know that. Then it's also the ideology itself. It's baked into the ideology. I was talking to Carl Benjamin about this the other day. he just thinks it's the logic of liberalism, and he may be right. He was talking about at the heart of liberalism is this idea that you're sort of there were just free people in the wilderness, and then society itself was an imposition upon them. This kind of Rousseauian idea, so that every further infraction onto someone's freedoms, every stricture of society is a kind of further infraction on someone's freedoms. Everything we make someone do, like pay, but it doesn't have to be pay taxes. Even very sensible things like not commit crimes, they're all a kind of imposition on someone's freedom. He believes that like at the heart of liberalism is this kind of fundamental sympathy for an illusory free person who is free from society. But that's one explanation. Certainly, what we've seen though from the progressive elite is it tends towards this anarcho tyranny. It tends towards a bizarre celebration of the criminal. It celebrates, as you say, it ends up celebrating anyone who's opposed to our values, but not us. As David Starkey has pointed out, Starmer's conception of human rights is to celebrate the rights of minorities against the majority, not the individual against the state, which it used to mean. So this is what we have, and I think the average person has been very surprised by this. I've been talking to my mum and finding out what people in Cumbria think, and just normal people back where I'm from, and I think they are shocked with Starmer. Things like Southport, several incidents have shocked people with Starmer. The degree to which he despises British people, or de facto despises them by his belief set, which is this strange thing, human rights. And I think it's actually quite similar to when people saw October 7th, whatever you think to Israel Palestine, when we saw the horrors of, as I think any sensible person can admit, it was horrific to see people raped and killed and so on. But we had people tweeting, "This is what decolonization looked like. What did you think this looked like?" and all that. And everyone went, "Oh, that's what you guys are talking about. Maybe we just stop funding this in universities." I think in a similar way, perhaps not quite as an extreme example, but people have seen, oh, Starmer really believes this. He really seems to favour foreign criminals over innocent British citizens. The people committing horrific crimes seem to be protected in various ways, whereas someone complaining about them seems to go directly to jail with no bail. This is just how it appears to the layman, and they may not piece together why, and I haven't fully pieced it together either. Carl says it's the heart of liberalism. I say it's this anarcho tyranny, but even Samuel Francis, who coined anarcho tyranny, didn't quite know. He didn't necessarily give a clear reason as to why it happens. Partly, it's just much easier to punish innocent people than it is to solve actual crimes. That could be one reason. But what we have, as you said, is a situation where anyone who's against the country is praised and wins. Anyone who has other values is praised and wins, and our values are hated and despised. I think the other thing is the thing Orwell mentioned about the elite, the sort of lefty elites always hating Britain. The thing about they'd rather be seen stealing from a poor box and stand for the national anthem. So that's in there as well. So with this whole concoction, this Labour government is the final, it's the apotheosis of all these things put together, and the average person is seeing that now, and they're saying, "Wow, this is absolutely horrific." They don't know anything about grooming gangs, but they have an Islamophobia council. They don't know anything about Southport, but they throw people posting in jail, and people are seeing it now. The final logic, Starmerism, the final logic of the progressive liberal elite, or whatever you call it, not even liberal elite, progressive, a bullshit elite.
I'm still genuinely astonished how we arrived at a point in the summer of 2024 where we saw a significant majority Labour Parliament. Now I know the turnout wasn't especially big, but I think in the wash up of all this, whenever it comes, we need to identify quite what happened there. I think what we will discover is that we were well on that. Obviously we ended up with the unit party, so there wasn't that much difference between the Tories and Labour, and that people were duped into thinking going to Labour would mean change. And of course, there was really no other option. Nobody understood enough about reform. We didn't know what reform had to offer on anything other than immigration. So they weren't ready at that point. And we know they weren't ready because Nigel Farage wasn't ready. And it was very late to come in, very late to make the decision that he was going to stand in Clacton to be an MP. So I think historically, we need to look back and we need to say, how did we get to that point? because it's astonishing where we've ended up. I think now, even North London intelligentsia commentariat types are probably looking at some of this and thinking, this is not good. This really, other than the rest is politics gang and the centrist dads gang, who are still thinking, "Oh, look what we've done! Look what we've done, Jerry! Haven't we done a good thing, Jerry?" And then they just carry on with their lives and they're not really impacted by it. And people like Alistair Campbell, the war criminal alleged, is able just to perpetuate his nonsense, because if he doesn't perpetuate his nonsense, then people might start looking at what it really means and everything he's done and said in the past. Rory Stewart is just an absolute wet flannel. Unbelievable. That guy was dangerously close to becoming the Tory leader at some point, and that actually tells you all you need to know about my original point in this diatribe, and that's that how did we get to this point? And the reason we probably got to this point is there wasn't any discernible difference between the two parties, and hidden below that sort of surface, "Oh, this is what we're going to do for the country, and isn't net zero wonderful," were the likes of Keir Starmer. The reason that Jeremy Corbyn, I think, didn't ever really get into significant power is because he told you what he was going to do. People didn't understand what Keir Starmer stood for. People like Peter Hitchens were saying exactly what was going to happen, and many of the things that Peter Hitchens warned across various outlets during the general election have come to fruition. He said he will bring us closer to the EU. He has done. He will not support British people or British values. He hasn't done. He's much more aligned to the other than to us.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Well, we all
He,
knew.
he had,
Go on.
his background is in favour of communism, and he's a man of the rules, and he's a man of the law. And the thing about being a man of the law is man-made, right? So it can change at any given point. He's not basing law on the Ten Commandments. He's not saying, this is what I believe in. He's saying that whatever the law is, that's what I believe in. And that's just weak. That's weak principally. That's weak in morals too.
Yeah, he believes that following the law, the letter of the law, is the same thing as morality, which far superior legal minds like Lord Sumption have said is not the case. He says you don't have a. Sumption famously said you have a legal obligation to follow the law. That's a tautology. But you don't have a moral obligation to follow a law if it's unjust. Whereas Starmer would be like, it's the law. I'm following the law, even though it's clearly awful. And he also doesn't apply that equally, because he's happy to say certain attacks are terrorist attacks immediately if they're the kind of ones that are his groups that he doesn't like British people. But if there are other groups like foreign criminals, he won't say it straight away. But just on the what happened at the election and Hitchens, we know what happened. People hated the Tories. They wanted to punish them at all costs. Reform, as you say, weren't quite ready. I mean, I voted for them, but they were never going to win in my area. And that's what happened. It was a punishment vote for the Tories. And Hitchens, and we don't want to get reopen the whole zero seats thing, but he was still wasn't really right. He was right. Of course, Starmer was going to be awful. Everyone knew that. And it's good that he pointed out to people that he's a Pabloite and how radical he is and so on. Pabloism being this subset of Trotskyism. But so he brought that to people's attention, but it wasn't the right thing either to vote Tories just to keep this worst Labour government out. Because then we'd have the Tories and we'd have the Boris wave, and that all had to be punished. So we had to probably go through this point of misery. It's a risky strategy, of course, but we probably had to go through this to get to the other side and get to reform. And now that finally seems like a possibility. I predicted Farage as Prime Minister 2029, but I didn't see how it could happen. But now it can finally happen. And on that, we may as well get to our final story in the YouTube version and the audio. And thank you for watching and listening, which is Reform UK tops landmark poll for first time. And I'm just looking here at Sky News. 1 in 5 individuals who voted Conservative at the last general election back in July would now vote for Reform, the poll finds. So Reform had 25%, Labour 24%, Tories 21%. And this is a Sky News YouGov poll. This is not some Guido Fawkes poll or something. So Lib Dems 14%. Obviously, Ed Davey doing great work on the water slides and on the FIFA campaign. And the Greens on 9% because people are insane. I mean, Kemi not doing well at all. Many of us said Kemi would be a bad leader. Of course, many like Lord Young disagreed, and it worked out for him because he got his nomination. I spoke to Toby about that the other day, and I said congratulations. But I said I can see why you like Kemi so much now. I'm sure it's his genuine belief. Um, but Kemi, absolutely terrible. Not a good leader. You can see that Chris Philp is on manoeuvres to be leader. You can see that Jemik still wants to be leader, in my opinion, because they keep commenting on everything and just I can just vibe. I'm picking up the vibes. But for the first time, reform are ahead, and it feels almost inevitable. The question is, can they win if Labour and Liberals do strategic voting? Do they need to do a pact with the Tories? I did speak to one Tory and said, and they did hint that they think that pact will happen. Then again, some people say, well, no, a lot of the reform votes come from Labour. They won't necessarily just come from Tories. That's an argument I've heard as well. It does feel somewhat inevitable. And I would just add that you saw Nigel Farage on the sofa having a sort of nice chat with Kat Deely, which is kind of, and the other guy, Ben something. That was unthinkable at one point. Then you saw that weird clip where he had the Chinese dragon, whatever, from Chinese New Year coming up to him, and he was just sat on the sofa looking, and he eventually went, just to do something. And some people are saying it was like a ritual humiliation of him, but it also showed he was kind of in the fabric of daytime TV. Farage has become he's basically become the mainstream, much in the way that Trump finally did in 2024. Now the question is, what will that look like? Will it be what we want? Will he have people like Rupert Lowe, but behind the scenes, really like going right? Let's push through these deportations, or will it be Farage just wanting to be too establishment and no real change? And that's my big fear that it won't be the radical change we need. But of course, it's better than it's our best shot, isn't it? I think. Let's see. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And it's becoming more. These polls were coming sort of lesser polls, shall we say, have been coming out for a couple of months now, pre-Christmas, and at first were kind of denied as outliers. And then, okay, yeah, we can see what's happening here. But of course, Reform have got no chance. Dominic Cummings is on record as saying that, there's absolutely no chance of Reform ever forming a government. I'm starting to think he'll probably end up eating those words. And of course, this is YouGov now. And like you say, Reform on 25%, Labour on 24%. With regards to a pact, a pact only benefits the Tories. Only benefits the Tories. Because you have to think about, I think you have to think about this longer term than just 2029 as well. This isn't about defeating Labour. This is about defeating the blob politics. And it needs reform in both sense of the words. It needs reform in terms of its political party. It needs reform in sense of the true English sense of the word. It needs to take what was before and reform it into something new. And the only way that's going to be achieved is probably to wipe out enough of the Tory vote to give a reform a healthy lead, but also, and I think this is probably the thing Labour are most worried about and are not talking about, is wipe out part of the Labour vote as well. I think there is maybe an 8 to 10% of that Labour vote that could go reform, particularly from the working classes. Now, I think it's possible. I mean, the most successful party in Europe and across the world, actually, of all time, is the Conservative Party. But I think now they're starting to look more and more like toast. And I can see reform, especially in the short to medium term, potentially destroying the Conservative Party. So that they would have to go away into the, you know, out into the land of Nod for some time and come back, not just lick their wounds. They'd have to change entirely. Labour's a different beast. Labour's a militant, union-led party, many churches and people within that. There are people within that could never imagine voting anything other than a union party. Now, but it has relied, of course, and the reason it did so well historically is it relied on the working man and woman. Now, if you're dyed-in-the-wool unionist, you probably haven't changed your mind. If you're a working person who is worried about putting food on the table, worried about seeing what's happening within your community, feeling like you can't access the services, and looking around and seeing why, that you've paid for, that you've worked hard for, and that the pound in your pocket is going absolutely nowhere, then I think you will start to look at the Labour Party in particular and say, what are you doing? And then they'll start listening to reform. Reform at the moment are riding high on a wave of populism based on the failures of other parties. And the reason they're doing so well is they've got two very astute political beasts. Nigel Farage is the most obvious, but Rupert Lowe is the secret weapon. The more I see of Rupert Lowe as a politician, the more I'm impressed by his ability to win over hearts and minds. We've had this discussion before. Not a big fan of Rupert Lowe, purely based on the fact that for some time he was the chairman of Southampton FC. I'm a Portsmouth fan. I'm sorry, I can't abide that. However, perhaps I've got to get over that. And what we're seeing with Rupert Lowe, I think he's not on manoeuvres in the same way Philp is or Wes Streeting is in the Labour Party. He's just doing his thing and he speaks very sensibly. Now, the two combined are very powerful, I think. And if they carry on doing the things they're doing and speaking to the common man and woman, then I think they're going to do very well. What is going to happen and hasn't happened yet is there are going to be some problems. There always is in politics. We don't know what they are going to be for reform yet. I'm sure that they'll overcome them, but they'll need to show that they've got that resilience. And one way that they can do that, I think, is via leading local councils. And of course, this is why Nigel Farage is so keen to make sure this reform of local councils into these big districts um, doesn't isn't enabled to go ahead without voting in any way or without having local elections in any way. Because if they can't get in and serve a sufficient amount of time and run councils, it's going to be very difficult for them to win over certain types of voters that they would need to push that 25% into the 30s. Obviously, once you get into the 30s, you're really, you've stolen enough from sorry, stolen is the wrong word, taken enough from the Conservatives and Tories to really have a good chance of forming a majority government. And the way they're going to be able to do that is people are going to want to be able to see how they lead locally. Can they transform local councils? Can they? And that will be done via rhetoric, by the way, because there isn't going to be any more money, but just the vibe. Just the vibe. You look at the way Trump talks. America's great. We are going to make it great again. DEI is nonsense. We're taking it out. We're not. Your taxpayers' money went on this. It's never going on that again, etc., etc. That's exactly the sort of thing that reform can do within the UK, and they're going to need to do that through the local councils. And if they kick those elections into the long grass and they don't have any elections till 2027, let's say, then that's not going to leave a lot of time. But I think ultimately, reform has earned their place in the poll, which is number one. And the future's bright for them. We just have some questions, and given the opportunity, I think they might be able to answer them. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing
I
you,
said a lot there, so
yeah,
there's a
there's a
lot,
lot,
a lot to take on board.
and there's a lot, and I don't want to. I know we've got to end soon as well, but I do want to say, just reply to one thing you said about Dominic Cummings. Yeah, he thinks all three parties could be split on around 20%, and then and he thinks there might be that. But he did say, I've always heard him say Farage can't beat his kind of 15-20% of the populace, but I did hear him say in one recent interview, it's whether maybe he can, if he does certain things, actually break that. So I'm not sure if he's 100% decided on that, but he did feel there's a definite possibility you get a three-way split, Tories, Reform, Labour, and then it's what comes next. Let's see. I mean, the progressive elite, we've seen, and we'll talk about it more with Trump in the next bit, but it's done basically. To me, it's done, and this is just the long death rattle of the progressive elite. We look at this Labour government; it's done. No one wants this stuff. No one wanted the Democrats in America. They're completely lost now. We're a bit weird because we've got all these midwits who are dedicated to the EU and just think that everything's right wing, and the led by donkeys mentality is quite strong. We've got various immigrant groups who hate the country. We've got a kind of general socialism. We don't quite have that American spirit, but you can see it building young men a right wing, for example. You do see it building. People are getting very sick of it. No one really likes this Labour government, with the exception, yeah, of the sort of deep state Ramona midwit types, basically. About the only people, even if they're not midwits, even if they're quite smart, they're just obsessed with that. Yeah, you're Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart, who of course isn't that smart and got schooled by JD Vance on his IQ, but those are the only people that like this, whatever this thing is, because they're so dedicated to the EU and they're so dedicated just to the old order. But other than that, it's done. It's done across Europe. It's done in America. But it's going to be a painful process. And look what happened to Trump
We
in prison. Or,
The old order
lawfare,
has been in
shot.
place.
Huh?
Sorry, Nick. Go on.
No, I was
Sorry,
going to say,
sorry,
look what
Nick.
happened to Trump.
Sorry.
They wanted to throw him in jail. He got shot at. His ear got shot. It's not going to be an easy process. But this thing is this is fundamental change is happening. We're at a time of we're somewhere in there. Whether where the end, it's the beginning of the end for the old elite, and I don't know where we are with the new one. It's emergent, right? It's nascent, but it's happening. Go on.
Yeah. And the point I was going to make is it's very easy for people, particularly of our age, to think that
Yeah.
this type of politics really sort of started in about the mid 90s, once New Labour had got bedded in and we'd had the terrorist attacks in New York, obviously on 9/11, and the world started to change, and we ended up with this, what we've got now, one way or the other. Now, I don't. That's not true, really. I mean, what happened is we won World War II, but we didn't win it alone. And because we didn't win it alone, we gave up our empire, and a new elite formed within the UK, and it's stayed ever since. And it's bred the Alistair Campbells, it's bred the Rory Stewarts, all these, the James O'Briens, that believe that essentially they're still fighting the Nazis. God bless them. They're a bit like senile people in an old people's home. Every time their fire alarm gets tested on a Tuesday at 11, think it's the siren to get down into the bomb shelter, because and that's an analogy for anything that they don't like as well. So if they see something slightly against their core beliefs, they see it as a direct threat to them, and they must broadcast this, and you must be scared too, because this is what's happening. And don't forget what happened in World War II, etc., etc., etc. And we've never quite overcome that, and it's taken different forms and gone different cycles in the 50s and the 60s, and of course the 70s was one thing, and then the 80s became another, and then we had the boom of the 90s again. But of course we entered into this war on terror from about 2001 onwards, and that gave us the vibe that we got now. And that's why I call it this neo-international socialism, where we are a race to find the most marginalised, victimised group. And since the war on terror, that has been Muslims. And if it's not Muslims because they're blowing people up, they'll turn their eye to whoever that minority victimised group is. And it's almost a clever argument, because who really wants to vote against the downtrodden, victimised minority? Really, if you believe what they say, then it's a difficult argument to say, well, no, these victims, they can fuck off.
Hmm.
But that's not what's being said. They are creating something, a fantasy that bolsters their argument, then holding it up, and that's the prism through which they look for the rest of all their arguments. And people are scared, because what they've successfully been able to do is manipulate society into believing if you critique any of these things, you're one of the isms, and then you are fucked. Because even to this day, in February 2025, to be accused of racism or Islamophobia or anything, transphobia, It's a huge issue for the vast majority of people, Nick. You and I could have that accusation thrown at us, and it might not stick. But for the average guy who just wants to keep his 40 grand a year office job, and he needs that to get the roof over his head, the last thing he's going to want to do is jeopardize that by getting into some debate about something he really doesn't know about, he doesn't really care about. If it's going to stop him earning, it's going to stop him getting his holiday twice a year, whatever it might be. So there's still a long way to go. But what Reform, to bring this right back to where I started, what Reform are doing is they're changing that perspective. They're saying, no, you can look at this a different way. How far is that pound going in your pocket, by the way, that you're working so hard for? Are your family protected? You're doing a good job of protecting your family, but is the government, is the wider country doing a good job of protecting your family? And I think the more and more people scrutinise what's going on, the more and more people feel unsafe, and they're feeling more confident
Hmm.
to speak. And the Alistair Campbells and the Rory Stewarts are starting to look more and more silly. And they did the Trump. We're going to get to it shortly, but the Trump election did half expose them.
Do you know what, Paul? You raised about 8 billion things there, right at the end of the podcast. So, sorry, maybe you're going to raise some more, but save that thought for after the
Well, the point is that we're going to discuss it.
we're going to
aren't
discuss
we?
the Trump stuff. Yeah, but there's so many things you raised that I wanted. But I can't possibly reply to them all now. But you're right about the post-war liberal order. Where it gets a bit confusing is Muslims were not seen as victims post. In 9/11, they were seen as the enemy, and it was part of the neocon expansionist wars. And then later, with woke, suddenly they were the victim. That's quite interesting. And also, when you talk about the new order, yes, this new order emerged, but it it was really the rise of this incentivism, game theory, the stuff Adam Curtis talks about. It was the rise of people seeing people as rational actors. This new labor ideology. You're right to say the old elite died. We lost the empire, and then the new elite came about. But really, it was the Fukuyama idea that the liberalism was the final form of society, and that started to come apart with 9/11 and with the Iraq War and with the economic crash in 2008. So to me, but you might have the way you sort of said it there maybe sounded like it was one straight line, but it's more like that
Yeah.
emerged, but then that started to collapse, and then that's led to woke, and that's led to where we are now, and now we're into the final collapse maybe of that liberal order and the end of history myth, and we're back to religion, and we're back to identity, and we're back to perhaps nationalism. And anyway, we'll get into all of this when we talk about Trump in the next section. Thank you for watching on YouTube and listening. um Hopefully you enjoyed it. We're back. I'm just finding my feet again, and literally, in fact, because I've been dizzy a lot, and and metaphorically. And you can find Paul, as it says in his background, at Paul Cox Comedy. And as I should have said at the start, you can get the rest of this on nickdixon.net, but you don't have to. And if you don't want to, you don't have to write comments about it. You don't have to complain about it. You just have it's just the option to go there, and it would help me, you know, eventually get out and where I can just do that full time and not have to. Anyway, won't finish that sentence. But nickdixon.net is where you can go for the full thing. It's very cheap, and you get this. You get my interviews with Carl Benjamin and Academic Agent and all these other kind of people you may well like. And I'm going to be doing far more on that in the future. As soon as I get better from my stupid illness, I'm going to be putting out far more content on nickdixon.net. So you can go there. But thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.